We were just talking to Dan about your return battles. He said Khalif is your returner and Godwin is your kick returner. And I'm just curious, Dave, how you weigh, we haven't seen a ton of Godwin on kick return in practice or in the games. How do you weigh knowing what you have in him from what he did last year versus what you're seeing from guys who are repping there this year? How do you weigh all that going into
Yeah, I would say, that's a good question because it is hard. It's hard to compare preseason to regular season. Sometimes you're playing against, I want to say this the right way, maybe not their best players, in a preseason game. Like, obviously, in the season, their best guys are out there covering kicks against you and all that. So it does make it tough. I think at the end of the day, what you're looking for in the preseason is guys to make explosive plays. Obviously, Alexander did that a week ago for us, so that was intriguing. So definitely something to look at. I think the good news for us is there's a lot of positions on this roster that are really competitive, and I think the kick return stuff is definitely one of those. So we'll see what happens in this last preseason game, and then ultimately Brad and Dan and those guys got to make some tough calls. Fortunately, not me.
Following up, I guess, a little bit on that. Godwin doesn't have a ton of experience as a kick returner. You put him in there last year, and he did pretty well. But everybody on this coaching staff always says the only way to get better at football is more reps, right? And so, why hasn't there been, I guess, more of an effort to get him work through this training camp if he's in that mix?
As a kick returner?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say at the end of the day, you only get a handful of reps. That's the one thing that's hard about like kickoff. Anytime you're talking about the returner positions, punt return, kick return, you don't know how many times they're going to punt the ball. We punted the ball 3 times in 2 games now, so if you're playing against us, then their returner's gotten 3 looks. Well, who do you put in? How do you do the rotation? Do you do it? He gets one and then the next guy gets one. Well, that's the only way to kind of balance the reps out. But 2 of those come in the third or fourth quarter when there's more down the line guys playing than the top of the roster playing. You know what I mean? And so it's like there's really no right way to do it, I don't think. The one thing I would say is I value all that regular season work quite a bit. I mean, if you see a guy do it in the National Football League against real players in the National Football League in regular season games, then you got a pretty good idea what he's going to do. And I would relate that to really the evaluation process of like a free agent versus a college, player coming out. If we got tape on a free agent and somebody comes to me and asks me what do I think this guy can do for us on special teams, here's all his film from playing in the National Football League, I feel like I got a pretty good idea of what he's going to do, and I feel really comfortable about giving an evaluation. And I think I should be held accountable for like, hey, if I'm off on that, then come get me. But a college guy, that thing's hit and miss just a lot more. It's just definitely harder. So I would say the same way. If you got regular season film on a guy, you have a pretty good idea what he is.
4 kickoff returns in the first half, 152 yards or whatever it was. How much do you look at what the return man did, and how much do you look at the guys who blocked up front for him when you're evaluating that?
I'd say you got to look at all of it. I had this conversation with a guy in our building the other days in analytics, and they look at punters and they grade guys and how well they're doing and all that. And my first question to him was, well, how do you account for the coverage and the guys around them and the scheme and the And he didn't know either, so he looked back at me. But anyway, so I think there's an art and a science to everything. And I think that's part of the art is to be able to say, hey, in this game it looked like that. I think this would kind of look more like this if it were in the regular season, one way or the other, and you're trying to project a little bit.
How was, in that regard, Craig Reynolds had one of the big blocks on that first return. I think it was the first return. Just how was he coming on special teams? A guy who didn't play a ton last year. So.
Yeah, I would say that position, man, all those running backs have really played at a high level. I know we talked last time I was in here about Jamar, and he's taken a big step forward. And then, there's 4 guys in that group that, to me, they can all play and contribute on special teams. All their skill set might be a little bit different, but all of them could help. So that's a competitive room. Glad I don't make that call either. So why you're asking about Godwin?
Your units are going to be a tiebreaker in many ways for some of these guys fighting for final roster spots. Has anybody during this camp maybe surprised you guys, maybe you didn't have here last year, or a guy you did last year, like maybe a Quintus Cephas who didn't play a whole lot of, reps on special teams surprised you with maybe some of the things they can do that you didn't know previously?
Gosh, I don't know. Yeah, I know what you're looking for. I don't think I have a great answer for you. I mean, I think I would just say that this is a hard time of year because a bunch of these guys have played at a high level. I think there's a lot of guys on this team who can play in this league, and some of them aren't going to make this team probably. And I think that's hard. But so I would say I don't know any one player to single anyone out. I don't know if that's fair to them or me, but I would say this group has been really fun to work with. They compete their tail off when they go out there and practice and work. It's been one of the most competitive groups that I've ever been around, from just a drill standpoint and just competing every day within the group. All four of those running backs, we got a bunch of safeties, that linebacker room, those guys all compete against each other. And so it's been really fun to be around them, and we'll see what happens.
Right, specifically then kicker, right? So Dan said, when we talked, I don't know, a week and a half ago or whatever, Austin had this slight edge. I don't think anybody's widened a gap there. So how close in your mind is that battle going into this final week here?
Yeah, I would say extremely close. In my opinion, it's really tight. I mean, they're two players that are really talented players. They're a little bit different in their skill set, but both of them are very intriguing and have a very high upside. So anyway, I would say it's very tight. It's going to be a tough decision. If you asked me today, I would say I don't think it'd be fair to make that decision today. There's still a little bit of time left, and I think it's so close that we really should take the whole time and find out what happens in this last game and this last week and a half of practice.
Tom Kennedy is the guy who's been showing up on offense, and Dan said they needed to kind of give him an opportunity on special teams to prove what he can do there. So I'm just kind of curious your evaluation of his performance in Indy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. What happened, I mean, he just went out and did what he's always done here against Atlanta, just made a bunch of plays. And then after that game, Dan and I were talking, and it was like, all this guy ever does is succeed in whatever we give him, whatever role. And so the conversation for us was like, hey, we need to throw him out there and find out, And then we threw him out there at Indy in the practice, a little bit in the game, and he was great in practice. He did a good job, And so it was like, man almighty, same thing, So I think he's done well for himself in terms of, what that does for him on the roster and all that. Obviously, I can't answer that. But I got a lot of respect for him as a player, as a person. All he ever does is give you everything he's got. And at the end of the day, he wins a lot too, which there's something to be said for that. So.
Where's his best fit on special teams?
Yeah, so I would say, that would be the biggest challenge for him, just from height, weight, speed, and special teams. Unfortunately, is a little bit of that. And I would say that's the challenge. But we played him outside as a gunner, and he won against Indy. Those guys, his gunner rep was one of our better ones. We played him outside as a corner, and he won that rep on the outside there against Indy. And then we matched him up against a personal protector, and he locked that guy up in practice and in the game. So there's a handful of spots for him.
You've thrown into a bunch of special team scenarios that didn't do it last year's Trinity Benson. How have you seen him respond to the challenges you put in his way?
Yeah, so I would say he does have an impressive skill set. He can run. And we put him in the middle of our kickoff coverage. We call it a 5 position, but he's lined up right on the hash. And he ran down there with a lot of speed and showed up well. Made a nice tackle against Atlanta in the opener down there, the one that Rodriguez kind of cleaned up. He got a lot of attention for it, but Trinity was really at the bottom of that. And he's got speed at the gunner spot, so that's encouraging. So I think he's done a good job. Where that stacks up in that group, who knows? I'm not giving away any answers, obviously. I already gave out the COVID stuff. I've given out too much.
One guy that I think you probably expected to have a lot on special teams 2 months ago, and I don't know how much you do now, Malcolm Rodriguez, just the way that he's ascended the defensive depth chart. But more than what his role will be for you, how have you seen he's a big star on Hard Knocks now? has that changed him at all? Is he still coming to work the same, diving into the?
Yeah, I don't watch Hard Knocks, but no. But no, I do. I heard that he went. Yeah, I've heard that he's been on there. But no, I'm happy for the guy. I mean, I thought highly of him coming out in the draft. We thought he could be a really good special teams player. He's obviously done a great job for us. I think he is taking on a little bit more of a defensive role, but I think we'll see how that all plans out. And that's like the hardest thing for me this week is like you just want to get everything sorted out and know who do you got to work with in that opening game. And every piece counts, so you have to know all 11 guys you're going to have and what their role is, what their defensive role is. Can I use them on 2 units, 3 units, 1 unit, no unit? But I do think that with that group of linebackers, there's probably a pretty good scenario where a lot of them are playing a handful on special teams. They might not be doing all 4, but they're doing enough for us because they all have a little bit of a role in that defensive scheme too. So they're kind of sharing some of that load, I think, with the way they're working them, which then would help us share some of that load on teams.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, appreciate it.
Thanks,
See
Mike.
y'all.